I am Dr. Meghan Clark. I'm an associate professor in the theology department and co-chair, along with Victoria O'Keefe, of our St. John's CRS Global Campus Committee. We are thrilled to have you with us tonight, and an event that originally should have been in person and should have been before everything got shut down for the pandemic. So we are truly glad to finally be able to at least virtually welcome Bill to St. John's. As is our custom, we begin with a prayer to just get us all in the right frame of mind. And I looked for a prayer for peace that fit with our theme for this evening, focusing on advocacy and justice, and one that applies to the many conflicts that are going on right now, especially in places like Ukraine and Palestine and Ethiopia, and many other places where there is violence and uncertainty, sometimes even within one's home, not even through the outside circumstances. And it's a prayer that I found through the Jesuits. A prayer for peace. How do we pray for peace from half a world away? How can words salve and soothe real wounds, assuage real fears, wipe tears from real eyes? God of endless compassion, transform our prayers from words into bridges that span distances between us, uniting our hearts in yours. Every time we turn our keys in a lock, may we remember those who are losing their homes. Every time we step into our cars, may we remember those who are having to flee. Every time we embrace our children, may we remember all those who are trying to shield theirs from war. May our besieged sisters and brothers be drawn into the arms of the suffering Christ, and may our cry be heard as one voice, ringing out from every corner of the earth. God of endless mercy, grant us peace. Amen.
Amen.
It is my pleasure to introduce to all of you Bill O'Keefe. As Catholic Relief Services Executive Vice President for Mission and Mobilization, Bill oversees CRS's efforts to build a movement of Catholics and others of goodwill to support CRS's global mission and build on action-oriented global solidarity with poor, vulnerable, and marginalized people all around the world. These efforts include lobbying Congress and the administration on a range of foreign policy issues and engaging U.S. Catholics in public campaigns to change U.S. foreign policy in ways that promote justice and reduce poverty overseas. Mr. O'Keefe received his Bachelor in Science cum laude from Yale University and a Master's in Public Policy from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. He joined CRS in 1987 as a project manager in Tanzania, designing and monitoring community development projects. He has served in various capacities for CRS, including leading CRS government relations and advocacy efforts since 2003, and as Executive Vice President for Mission and Mobilization since 2019. So I know that everybody joins me in welcoming Bill virtually to St. John's, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks so much, Megan, and thank you, Victoria, and everybody in the St. John's community. First of all, for welcoming me so generously and kindly, and second of all, for all your support to the mission of Catholic Relief Services and to our brothers and sisters from around the world and the solidarity that we all share together. So it's really a pleasure for me to be with you. I want to do a couple of things tonight. First, talk a little bit about why advocacy is important to Catholic Relief Services and frankly to myself and in my own vocation as a staff of Catholic Relief Services, and then talk about our strategy of advocacy to take you under the hood a little bit, and then some of the key issues that we are now advocating on. And then we're going to have a discussion and question and answer, which I'm super looking forward to. So, first of all, I was drawn to advocacy because of two things. One, I went to a Jesuit high school where they taught us to be to live one's life for others. And as I reflected on what that meant for me, and particularly in some of the dinner table conversations I had as a child, engaging in policy and policy change was something that I was just interested in. My family talked about Chicago politics where I grew up more than anything else. And actually my 84-year-old mother, if you talk to her, that's more or less all she wants to talk about is Chicago politics. So I was educated about the political change as an important driver to making the world a better place from an early age. I also was attracted as a Catholic, which I am, because the Catholic Church, in its social teaching, looks at human thriving both from a perspective of the individual and the systems and structures that support human life and human thriving. And it was clear to me, as I know it is to you all, that many of the systems and structures that human beings find themselves in are sadly broken. And so I made a commitment to myself through CRS to try to work on some of those systems and structures. Advocacy is also super important because it really makes a difference. And I have found at CRS that when we get our act together, we can make a profound difference in the lives of people. And I'm going to quickly tell a story about that, and then talk about how we do what we do. The picture here is a picture that was taken right before the pandemic in January 2020 in Gaza. I have another picture that's almost identical in the same exact room just about a month ago with many of the same colleagues. The main difference is my hair was a lot longer. I got it cut about 2 weeks ago, and I had this kind of pandemic thing going on. But my colleagues in Gaza and in the West Bank are incredibly brave and courageous, committed human beings working to change their own, the course of their own lives as well as their society. You may recall, some of you, that during the previous U.S. administration, all U.S. assistance to the Palestinians was cut off by the government. And CRS has had a program in the West Bank and Gaza since 1967, and much of our work has been supported by the U.S. government over those years. We fought very hard against the administration's policies around Palestine, and in particular, the cutoff of all assistance, and invested a huge amount of time and energy in trying to change that policy, which we thought was both unjust, cruel, unnecessary, and really targeted only the vulnerable people. So there are a couple things that we did. First of all, we have a team, myself and others, who directly lobbied the administration to try to get them to change their mind and to present information about how assistance to the Palestinian community was used by CRS and what a difference it would make. We then reached out to Republican members of Congress to get them to try to reach out to the administration and to on our behalf. And we have many Republican and Democratic allies in Congress who realize that that assistance to the Palestinian community was both the right thing to do and also a smart thing from U.S. policy. And then we also engaged Catholics in the U.S. to speak up and let their legislators know about why this was important, so that those legislators would also contact the administration. Finally, we reached out to some of our supporters and to some of the bishops of the U.S. and asked them to contact the White House, and in particular, Bishop Kevin Rhodes, who is from Indiana and happened to know Vice President Mike Pence. Through the sum of those interventions in the last months of the Trump administration, we managed to get assistance to the Palestinian people. And I had the opportunity just a couple of weeks ago to go and visit the first project that was funded with the restarted assistance. And that project was the foundation of the COVID response in the West Bank. And it was assistance to the Caritas Baby Hospital in Bethlehem, which enabled them to establish a treatment center, PCR testing, the first PCR testing in the southern half of the West Bank, infection control, to train 10 other health centers. And it was just an amazing experience to see the entire view of the success of the project and the impact it was having now, having walked with that project all the way through the process of advocating for it. So I felt just really proud about that. And it was an indication to me of how all the people who had been involved in that chain all along the way had made a huge difference. I'm going to now talk a little bit about our model. So, you know, the policy change process in the United States is really quite complicated, and in some ways it's getting more complicated than it was before. I don't know, you all are may have missed the famous Sesame Street public television cartoon about how a bill becomes a law. And it was all very linear. Unfortunately, it's gotten all very circular. There used to be much more straightforward processes, but the basic strategy from our perspective has two elements. First, on the left, the blue bubbles are all the things we do to directly lobby and influence in Washington. So we have a Capitol Hill outreach, a team of folks that are every day lobbying and advocating. We are working with the USCCB, the Catholic Bishops' Conference, in partnership to bring kind of a unified Catholic voice. We're working directly with the US administration. We work with both Republicans and Democrats to try to bring the case to them so that they understand why what we're recommending is so important. We work in coalition with other groups. Super important. Every issue has a group of like-minded organizations, and together we are much more powerful than we are by ourselves. And then we bring our overseas partners and our staff to Washington, now virtually, so that they can speak directly to legislators or members of the administration and make their own case, not mediated through us, but on their own. That's been something that's been really exciting during the pandemic, is as we've gotten better at this technology, we've really been able to bring more people to the table who otherwise would not be. Then on the right, the gray bubbles, or whatever they are petals of the daisy. They are all, those are how we help mobilize political support from constituents as part of the democratic process. Starting at the top, CRS organizes campaigns. We have now a campaign on hunger and a campaign on migration. And those supporters and participants write their congresspeople, respond to our action alerts, and are really important in kind of softening the defenses of members of Congress and letting them know that there's general support for what we're trying to do. We have grassroots advocates, chapter members, college ambassadors like yourselves, who then are more involved, who are willing to call their member of Congress or the staff. We're going to have visits with their member of Congress or staff. Those are incredibly important, and we've done a lot of research which shows that is actually the most important bubble. Those most active citizens who are willing to spend their time to have a phone call or to have a meeting with a congressional staff or member have a huge difference on the thinking of those members. We try to get our message out through media and social media as well, of course, we're like everybody else. And to amplify what we're trying to do and bring more people in. And finally, like Bishop Rhodes, who advocating in Palestine, we bring our board members, our bishops, the state Catholic conference directors, and other people who might have some particular influence through the political process. And my job is to try to put all this together into an advocacy strategy that gets the right people at the right time to make the right decisions for the benefit of those around the world that we're working with. I want to talk a little bit about hunger. This was a very different presentation about 5 years ago because we had a fantastic story to tell about how the levels of hunger in the world were dropping. There were hundreds of millions of fewer poorer people. Unfortunately, that progress has been reversed. Lots of reasons, and they all boil down to what we are referring to as the 3 C's of conflict, climate change, and COVID. Each of these is kind of a force multiplier in making vulnerable people even more vulnerable, and they're kind of feeding each other, these 3 trends, in really concerning ways, particularly right now. The U.S. response to hunger traditionally is extremely important. This wonderful woman in this picture is from northern Ethiopia. She, before conflict and drought set in Ethiopia, was a successful professional woman working in an office. And as a result of conflict, she lost her job. Her family became desperate and homeless, and now is dependent on assistance from the United States provided through CRS, which is, critical for, frankly, millions of people in Ethiopia and tens of millions of people from around the world. The U.S. is the most generous donor from a nominal, sort of an absolute level. On a per capita level, not so much. And so we have a lot to be proud of and a lot more to do. This is an important year in advocacy around global hunger because, for a couple of reasons. First, the Farm Bill, which is the legislation which sets the United States agricultural policy, includes a sliver that has to do with international food assistance and making sure that food assistance is generous and also effective is what we're going to be working on as part of the process in the next year or so. Then let me move to, great work there that we'll be able to do together over the next year in terms of advocacy. Let me shift to global health. Lots of issues in health. I'm going to talk just briefly around COVID. For us at CRS, this has been a really rough couple of years. We've lost a number of staff from around the world from COVID. I know many of your families have suffered. It's really the first emergency for me and others in the United States where we are living through the emergency that we are responding to. I, for a long time, have really respected my colleagues in the Philippines who, as they are responding to a typhoon, are helping their elderly parents to find safety. And what's that like to worry about your own parents? I mean, for me to worry about my 84-year-old mother and how to keep her safe while responding to COVID. It's really deepened my respect for my colleagues around the world, as well as all those who are helping their communities while working their way through the same crises. We really had to pivot at the beginning of the pandemic to provide PPE, to adapt all our programs so that they were providing safe opportunities for people to participate. and then had to address all the secondary impacts. And those are people who lost their jobs, increasing hunger. It's been a real challenge for us, and one that I think we've done a really nice job adapting, but it's a kind of work in progress here. We also are involved in the distribution of vaccines. We are trying to fight disinformation. I'm sure you've all noticed there's a lot of disinformation about vaccines and COVID out there. It's the same everywhere. Facebook is doing the same, like bad juju everywhere. And so it's just an incredible task everywhere where we are working. We are training staff in health workers, helping governments and church health facilities to provide vaccines. And we're fighting for global vaccine equity. As a matter of Catholic teaching, health is a basic human right. Life-saving treatments like vaccines should be available to everyone, and they are not. And we have been fighting that battle. I can't say terribly successfully, but we continue to fight. Migrants and refugees, this is a Ukrainian woman who fled over the border into Moldova. The crisis in Ukraine has really aggravated the food security situation, which I'll get to in a second, but it's really been, greatly increased the number of migrants and refugees. I was listening to the radio while eating dinner before our webinar and heard on NPR that the UN has just estimated that over 5 million, we've just gotten to 5 million Ukrainians who have fled their own country, another 7 million who are internally displaced, all within 6 weeks. It's just an unbelievable cataclysm for so many innocent people. In terms of our advocacy, we're going to be fighting for supplemental funding to meet the needs of Ukrainians in Ukraine and in other countries, and I'm talking about the humanitarian needs. We are also going to be fighting for addressing all these kind of spin-off hunger, food security challenges in countries like Lebanon, in Palestine, and in many countries around the world. I will say when I was in Gaza a couple weeks ago, I was in a small grocery store and I looked at the flour shelf, the oil shelf, and the yeast shelf, and everything on those shelves was produced in Russia or Ukraine. So many countries in the Middle East and in North Africa are dependent on food from Russia and Ukraine, and it's going to be a real challenge. The other thing that we're doing is addressing mental health issues and from the trauma of all the of what people in conflict and going through the refugee experience have suffered. And so in our response, we provide a lot of opportunities for children and adults. I saw some of this in Gaza, actually, which was, I can talk about later, but in the Ukraine crisis, helping people who have fled and have experienced war to have a safe space to be able to process what they've been through so they can psychologically move forward and aren't stuck. We're working on a bill in Congress too called the Mines Act, which is going to push the US government to provide better psychosocial care in these kinds of situations. Mental health is an area that isn't always considered part of humanitarian assistance, and it really should be. So we're really committed to making that happen. I want to just mention climate change. I tell members of Congress that are soft on climate change that I'm not here to have a philosophical debate, but I am here to say everywhere where I go, the farmer will tell you the climate has changed. And so you can, believe whatever you want, but I'm just telling you that in Rwanda, it used to rain on August 15th every year, more or less. And now they don't know when it's going to rain and they don't know how much it's going to rain. In Nicaragua and El Salvador and other coffee growing regions in Central America, they used to grow coffee at X elevation, and now it's too hot and they have to go to X plus 1,000 feet. if you know the shape of a mountain, the higher you go, the less land there is. There's a lot of pressure, then economic pressure that comes from having to make those changes. I could go on about stories in Madagascar, in Niger, and in Tanzania, and in many countries around the world where agricultural practices that worked for generation after generation no longer work. We're helping those farmers to adapt, helping them to experiment with new techniques to better take care of their land so they have a better chance of being resilient to the changes which are coming. And we're also fighting from an advocacy perspective for the Green Climate Fund, which is the Paris Climate Accord mechanism, global mechanism to capture financing and distribute it to projects that help people adapt and that help mitigate the impacts of climate change. Happy to talk about that in more detail later, but lots of good work on the ground, connected with great advocacy work in the United States. And I think we have an opportunity in the next couple of years, which we haven't had for the last couple of years, to move the needle on climate change. Advocacy and you. So, I am sure I didn't do advocacy when I was a student, and I didn't know anything about it until I went to graduate school. Frankly, but what I have seen when I have taken groups of college students in person to congressional offices, I can tell you the members are a lot interested in talking to students from the district than they are talking to me. Why? They know I'm doing this as part of my job. They don't know how committed I am. I am committed. I believe very strongly in what I'm doing. I believe in the work that I'm advocating for. But at the end of the day, they know this is my job. When students who take time, who could be doing all sorts of other things, travel to Washington or organize themselves to get on Zoom, and who are voters and who use social media and who can speak passionately about what they believe when they're in the office, it makes a huge difference. And again, they know that you are a voter in their district or in the state where the senator is from, and I am just a sort of paid employee. And so never underestimate that. The other thing that's interesting is, again, in the in-person world, they always like to get pictures with students that they can use to show that they are that they're reaching out to their district. And so, in politics, there's a sort of you scratch my back, I scratch yours element to it, where we are providing them an opportunity to meet with their constituents. And then that opportunity provides us, with the opportunity to say what we think. And that's good for our political process. And it really makes a difference in convincing members that this is, whatever the issue is, important. Student advocates are some of the most effective advocates out there, and it's really a fantastic honor for me to be a part of our university chapters, to be a friend of St. John's University, and I think why don't we stop there? There's other things I could certainly talk about, but maybe our time would be better spent. I've gone a little less than 30 minutes, and this will give us time for Q&A and discussion.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to do now is to introduce, we have two students who are going to serve as the initial responders, and I want to remind anyone, if you have any thoughts or questions for Bill, or prompted by the students as they respond, to please put them in the chat, which is open to everyone and everybody can use. We have with us this evening Sara Khan, who is a first-year biology student. Just ends up being the case accidentally that we have two biology students with us here tonight. On the pre-med track, where she aspires to specialize in emergency neurosurgery in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, upon graduation. Aside from her interest in medicine, she's a youth activist on a range of social justice issues affecting our globe's underdeveloped countries and underrepresented and marginalized groups. By being heavily involved in activism and community organizing at a young age, and through having the privilege of being part of the CRS Ambassadors of Global Justice, she hopes to expand her empathy, passion, and service, working to make the world a better and more equitable place to live in. Joining her is Marin Thomas, a sophomore biology student. Here at St. John's, she is the co-advocacy chair for the CRS Ambassadors of Global Justice and passionate about helping to educate students about important issues around the world. The CRS Ambassadors for Global Justice has given her many opportunities to be a student leader and expose her to issues she didn't know about before. She is currently also working as a medical scribe in the emergency room. So I couldn't be happier than to have these two young women as our respondents, in part because of the way in which, yes, you are biology students, yes, you are both interested in medicine, but one thing I've seen from watching all that you do at St. John's, and even the way you framed your, right, what is it that's important about who you are as a St. John's student, already brings together the different intersections of medicine and social justice and climate and all of these things that Bill was presenting that is integrating the CRS approach as well. And so now I'm going to turn it over, and I don't know if Merin or Sara wishes to start.
I can go first. One of the questions I was thinking about is that there's so many problems that are going on in the world, like the hunger crisis and the war. So I'm wondering, what is the best way to address everything that's going on? Because it's hard to put your attention to just like multiple things, and I'm just wondering what you think.
That is a great question, and I think it's a question that many people grapple with because it can really seem overwhelming, first of all, and we're just one person, each of us, and it seems like there's this huge host of problems, and they're all bigger than we are. And I have two responses to that. The first is, pick what you're most passionate about and what issue you think or issues you really care most about, and stay focused on those. And I think that because the passion is part of serves two purposes. First of all, it's infectious, and so if you're advocating to somebody and you're passionate about it, that passion is in and of itself infectious and part of the advocacy. And the second thing is, it will better drive you to excellence in your advocacy. It'll drive you to study and get your facts right. It'll drive you to spend the time to kind of really think about what you're saying, so that because you care more deeply about it. So, I mean, it seems kind of straightforward, but basically, avoid the temptation of being overwhelmed by focusing on what you care about and dive into that. And just know that you're making a difference in what you care about. And that's, each of us can only do what we can do. And by being true to ourselves and advocating on what we want, what we really truly believe is most important, you're going to be contributing the most that you can to the system and to the change that you want to see. And I think that the second thing is, it can feel overwhelming, and particularly the big issues, it seems like they don't change. And that can be discouraging. However, if I look back on human history, and if I look back on the last 50 years, there's been huge progress in many different areas of human life, in terms of infant mortality rates plummeting, in terms of except for the last couple of years, hunger rates plummeting. In terms of actually conflict, there's a lot of conflict, and the news, of course, can make you think it's everywhere. There's less conflict than there was 30 years ago, particularly between states, again, until 6 weeks ago. So there's a lot of positive things that happen that just kind of don't end up getting, people don't realize. The other thing is the nature, and I'm sorry to go on, I'll shut up, I promise, after this last point. The nature of meaningful change is not linear. And what that means is if I put in 5% of work, I don't see 5% of change. So, and that's really kind of frustrating. Change is really much more, in my view, much more, particularly on the key important issues. Things go along for a long time, and then there is a dramatic change. And so if you look at, for example, the rights of women in our society, they were very poor for thousands of years. And then, at least in some places, in a very narrow window within a generation, they have changed radically, not completely, but radically. And so that change, lots of people tried to change that for a long time, and it seemed like nothing happened. And then over a short period of time, it did. And so my faith gives me hope that that is the way the world changes. And if I keep doing the right thing on the issues that I care about, they will change like that. I may not see it, but it will happen because it has happened. The Soviet Union fell. Nobody anticipated it. South Africa, apartheid, it fell. Nobody anticipated it. And these things fall like that. So, sorry, that was a very long answer.
Thank you. I thought it was really interesting when you said like all the change happens in like a short amount of time. Like that's really true. What we've seen so far.
Yeah.
So, Bill, it is a pleasure to be in presence with you and the amazing things in your work. And so, I had one question. As a person who has really recently dived into youth activism and advocacy, especially on a local level on campus awareness, I wanted to know when you talk about global development, it is a broad term because there's a lot of communities that are underrepresented on a local level. And so, how would you recommend students, particular like college students, to have the sense of being more self-aware of how they can be able to advocate for local development and then national development and then global development as a result. Like for example, one thing that resonated with me when you were talking was that health is a basic human right. And as a person that wants to get into medicine, seeing that recent videos in Syria that Syrians are eating rotten bread on floors and stuff like that. It is an amazing ideology, but it's not as universal as we wish it to be. And so there's a lot of communities on a local level that need to be developed. But how do we go about that? And how do we advocate for issues when there's a lot of particular communities that need to be represented?
That's a great question. And there's a lot there. So let me see if I can unpack it a little bit. First of all, Sara, are you interested in emergency neurosurgery?
Yes, that's the plan.
Okay. Here's how I'm going to make a connection with that to answer your question. So as I was exercising before eating dinner, before this webinar, I was listening to NPR, and there was a fantastic story about healthcare in Gaza. And the story talked about a man, an elderly man, and his son. The elderly man needs heart surgery and can't get out, and the Israeli authorities won't let him get out, and the son is concerned he's going to die. It's terrible. They need more doctors. And they talked to about the need for neurosurgeons, and they talked to a neurosurgeon and it was interesting, an emergency neurosurgeon. And so, first of all, what somebody can do who's interested in a particular problem is to pick up a career in a solution on a particular problem. And so, at that level, I think that is, a fantastic thing to do. I mean, I was interested in trying to make, I was much less focused than you, and I'm sure many of the other students. I had a vague notion of as part of my Catholic faith of helping help people through the church internationally, and that led me to Catholic Relief Services, which for me was the perfect expression of my values and what I wanted to do. And I think each of us, and I would encourage each of you all to think about that, like, what is my vocation in terms of my values and how can I make a contribution? So at one level, that's where addressing particular problems in a particular way with your own gifts and skills and is a gift. And so I would encourage you to do that discernment, everybody. Second thing is, you like CRS, supporting CRS and becoming involved in the advocacy around CRS is attacking some of these critical issues in the countries where we're operating. Here's a great example. One of the things we're working on now is the topic of locally led development, which sounds jargony, but the basic idea is, for way too long, groups from the outside have come into communities around the world and imposed, with funding from governments, their own ideas. CRS has, for many, many years, worked through local partners. Our job is to strengthen those partners, help them to take leadership in their own societies. I think we're ahead of many other groups. We, lots to learn, of course, but we are advocating very hard that the US government, in its assistance, orient its work much more to direct assistance to local organizations. And that really hasn't been their model. And that will allow, that kind of change in the system of how business is done will allow for more localized assistance that is more tailored to the local issues that I think you're referring to and the differences between communities and the injustices that are very particular. And I think it's that balance of, like, we need big solutions to attack big problems, but sometimes those big solutions are generic and therefore miss some of the important, very local differences and distinctions. And so I think that's that sort of key in program design, to build in the local and build in the scale. And that's something we're really working at CRS, and it's something that we can advocate for in the design of kind of government programs. If somebody, like any of you, ended up working at the World Bank, for example, financing big government infrastructure projects, you'd want to ask those kinds of questions. How can we get this money directed in a way that makes an influence at scale, but also, but in a way that doesn't, like, run over the particular differences between communities? I hope that gets at the beginning of your question.
That does, and it's very interesting that you got you saw that, like, that radio segment, because the reason why I wanted to get into neurosurgery is because there's a huge lack of that in the Middle East and the North Africa region, because of, like, one areas there's, like, a severe lack of mental health awareness, and, like you were saying, like, psychosocial aid as well. And so I did have a following question, and I hope that's okay. You recently had a trip to Gaza, and I have been trying, like, my level best to bring more campus awareness towards the Palestine situation. And so I recently just had a panel that I was moderating with my friends and my orgs that we collaborated with. It was called "In Solidarity: Human Rights Violations in Palestine." We had an amazing turnout, and they were all majority of being students, and a lot of people people were engaged into the discussion and the discourse that we were bringing about. And so my question was, how did you see when you had your trip? How did you see young Palestinians in particular advocate for their own oppression? Because
Yeah.
you tend to see the people from America, you tend to see the people of European countries advocating on behalf of Palestinians. I myself am not Palestinian, but I know that it is the right thing to do to advocate for those voices that are not being as represented. But my question is, how did you personally see them advocate for their cause? Because unfortunately, they tend to be very censored, as does any country in need.
Yeah, that is a great question. And again, we could have a great graduate level seminar and on that same topic. So I'm gonna, at the risk of being reductionist, I'll say a couple of things. First of all, it was really, I mean, I think I've been to Palestine probably 15 times. It's the country I've been to the most for a variety of reasons. And I can tell you all sorts of stories of why I feel so committed to the place and to the people. Part of it is in Gaza in particular. I will say the CRS has quite a young staff, and it is unbelievable how committed, talented, competent people are. And I think that there's a couple of things going on. One, we I had the opportunity on this last trip to meet a young woman. She was probably 23. She was married. She had gone to college. This incredibly educated population in Palestine, one of the most educated in the world. It's has a very strong university system. And the problem is there's 50% unemployment rate in Gaza, but the education is fantastic. We're supporting this young woman with a kind of a starter capital loan. She's an entrepreneur. She started with her husband this farm, and literally in 6 months, she had 3 crops of potatoes, had turned over a profit, used the profit to start a farm of tomatoes, and then was working with another NGO and had bought 3 goats, which she was growing for Ramadan. And it was just the all to say the resourcefulness that I have seen of young people and resilience, and it's just unbelievable in to me in Palestine, when I'm sure I would have like crumpled up in some corner somewhere. I mean, it's just really impressive. There are many groups advocating, of young people advocating for, kind of the basic rights of one having to do with the occupation, but a lot having to do with, like, we need better schools. We need, kind of the all politics is local stuff that's really important in the lives of people. The last time I was there, this was just so awesome. We met with a group of young women who were part of it was a psychosocial kind of support group. Part of what they were doing was they had a project that they had designed, and the project was called the Be Happy Project. And so I said, I'm in the room, there's like 15 young women, and they're meeting with the mayor of the little town, and they're explaining to him what the Be Happy Project is. And then I'm, of course, extremely curious, like, what is the Be Happy Project? So what had happened is the school in their village had been bombed by the Israelis, and a number of students, boys, had been killed. And as a result, frankly, everybody was depressed. And so they had this like whiteboard with a project plan all scoped out of how they were going to work in that school with the community leaders, with their parents, and with the elders on how to help those kids get over what had happened. That is activism. that is like taking, so my point is like people, what I've seen is youth just taking the bull by the horns and doing things to help their fellow youth and others. And I just think that's really super powerful. I think that in the West Bank, there's more political activism than there is in Gaza. And there are lots of groups that are, in some ways fighting with each other as well as fighting with the, kind of lots of nonviolent activism about the occupation. And I think it's it's a very challenging place to do that kind of work. But I did see a few windows into it. I think that's, yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
We actually do have one question from the audience, but I want to, if Merin has another question, I want to let her ask that first.
I wanted to ask, like, what's the best way to advocate for mental health? So I'm very interested in that. And I know you talked about the Minds Act, and I wanted to see if there's anything else that CRS is advocating for in terms of mental health.
So great question. Thank you. The Minds Act is what we're working on right now. It's interesting. We had a huge victory a year ago on something called the Global Child Thrive Act, which had a kind of component in it for mental health for children, and was really focused on school readiness and preparedness, both in terms of nutrition, parenting, and also mental health, so that every child would be by age 5, 6, have the best chance at success that they possibly could have. That bill did pass. We're now focusing on implementing that bill and making sure that what was agreed to will actually happen. But I think the Minds Act right now is the best thing, at least at the federal level. I think in particular refugee responses, certainly making sure that the government is addressing mental health concerns of those who are going through that experience and holding them accountable to that is certainly something also that people can do. But the Minds Act right now is the best thing in terms of the system of addressing this issue.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So far, we've been talking about the positive impacts that things have. And the question that's come in the Q&A, which is from Father Thomas Sara at Fordham, is can you identify some of the what are some of the most common mistakes that people make when they attempt to be advocates or activists? And how do we avoid them?
That's a great question. And I'm going to answer it on two levels. One is, there are good ways and bad ways, successful ways and unsuccessful ways of holding meetings that have to do with meetings with members of Congress or their staff. And I have certainly witnessed unsuccessful ones, and those usually resolve around not being prepared, not doing your homework in terms of what is the perspective of the person you're meeting with, so that you can message what you're trying to communicate in a way that has the best chance of being understood and heard by the person you're trying to convince. Not being personal enough. I think sometimes people, particularly on global issues, they're kind of afraid to put themselves in it. So they kind of read talking points and they don't really dig down deep and say why that's important to them. The why is something that really does, I think, it's what opens the door of people's minds to listen to the what. If you have a good why something's important, that's compelling, then you'll get their attention. And you'll also, my goal is always, when that person who I'm advocating to puts their head on the pillow that night and they've met with 30 different people and they've listened to, 20 hours of media from all sorts of different sources, I want the story that I told them to be the thing that they can't get out of their head, or the turn of phrase, or the way of expressing an idea with an image that captures their imagination. And so I think if you don't spend the time to kind of think about that communication, then it's not as effective. There's advocating for things that are bad ideas. There's advocating for things that are just not, nobody else is interested in, or that there's no space for. I mean, there's certainly lots of ways to sabotage oneself. I think lack of confidence too. I really do. One of the most gratifying things I've gotten to do is to take people around from non-democratic countries to congressional offices and see them have an experience of what it's like to actually look a government official in the eye and tell them what you think. Lots of countries, bad things happen if you do that. And so it's a very empowering thing if you do it and you do it well. And so I don't know. I hope that's helpful. It's a great question. The sort of counter positive or whatever of good advocacy. How can you mess it up?
Well, I think
Megan, can I add one other thing about that? I think one of the things too is that we can do is become part of the problem. And so I think in terms of I'll say in terms of Palestine, for example, I am very passionate about the issue, and I'm very passionate about the rights of the Palestinian community, but I've really worked hard not to become hateful or frankly disrespectful of those who are concerned about Israel or about Israelis as people. And so I think that certainly as a Catholic, as someone who's trying to advocate in a way consistent with my own values of building a better world, I do have to kind of work at being charitable to everybody, even if I disagree passionately. And so and I think we have to do that interior work, or we become part of the problem. We become part of the toxic polarization that is pulling our society apart. And I think that's hard. It's really hard. A lot of pressure is going in the other direction.
I think that's a really good point, and it ties a little bit to the point I wanted to kind of make that came to my head as you were talking in response to what mistakes do people make. When you said, right, like that one of the biggest mistakes is not being prepared enough. Not being prepared, right? Not about your preparation on your issue, but preparing for the meeting that you're having, right? Preparing for who it is you're going to talk to. And I think and I say this as a teacher, I think one of the things that, and as a theologian by trade and training, one of the things that gets missed is, and I think the dangers is being afraid to do that as if it is somehow lessening your message or lessening your advocacy, right? That's so right. Your audience matters, right? And you might want all of these things, and you might know that all of these things are important, but only one of them is the person in front of you going to hear, right? And so, right, you have to target in on what it is that will be heard, and then build, right, and then build on that. And I think we can be so passionate that, right, we don't want to lessen the urgency of what we're talking, right, of what's going on. And so I think part of it's preparing, but I think part of it too ties in with also this, right, how do I not get sucked into the division and the being angry about what is wrong, and those who are not on board with, right, that are not on board with fixing, can kind of get in our way of not just the preparation, but the, okay, who am I talking to today, and how do I get them to hear me? And that might mean only saying a fraction of what I know really needs to be said. And that's a challenge sometimes, especially about the things that we're most passionate about.
I think that's a really good point, and I think you know, there's a time and a place for everything, and there are protest marches where someone can peacefully express with full passion their anger. That is not a congressional meeting, and and um, I think the reason is, you know, we have a, like, I'm sure all of us who are passionate are the same way. And like, I have an infinite supply of things I want to tell, you know, Kevin McCarthy about, believe me. And it's a very, very long list of my asks. But that's not why he's taking the meeting. And my goal is not to have one meeting. Actually, my goal is to build a relationship that over time I can have maybe some more difficult conversations. And I think that's something that sometimes gets lost in the anger is it doesn't help with the relationship. And so even people who we disagree with, who are in positions, if we can build a relationship over time, we can help to kind of move them along and hold them accountable in the context of that relationship. And I'm going to say, we've had that, and actually a number of priests who have done CRS lobbying visits have said, you know, this person disagrees with the church on so many different things, but because we started with global hunger, we were able to have civil conversations about other questions that we strongly disagree about. That's a huge victory, frankly. But they had spent the time to build the relationship, and that is what allowed them to leverage that influence for other things. And I think playing the long game, I guess, is, you know, it's not all in one. You don't have to pack everything into one meeting.
Before I say a little bit about the current campaign that's going on that you briefly mentioned, the Green Climate Fund, I wanted just to see if Sara or Merin had anything else that they would like to add.
I wanted to just say something. So you were saying that how when you advocate for an issue, and this tends to be a mistake that a lot of youth activists go about, is that they tend to blame it on the groups of people or anything of that sort. Like, for example, the plastics crisis in Africa is because of the communities and their inability to recycle or anything of that sort. But rather, it's not the people, but rather the systems that are governing our people. It's the systems, it's the institutions, it's all that not only have colonialized our people, but our minds. And so one thing that I remember I had to do this, I'm really passionate about single-use plastics and trying to preserve our landfills and also not exporting billions of gallons of plastics in South America. I mean, it's like South Asia and all these countries that are underdeveloped that lessen their global development. And I remember I was meeting with one of my local representatives, and he was saying that like you coming is better than like digital media, like digital advocacy actually is something that I'm passionate about as well, but it tends to be when people think that that is the only way of going about advocacy, so that they can advocate all they want for media, but when it comes to the real life, your local representatives, your congresswomen, your congressmen, they are the ones that hold the most power that you have to go to. And I feel like a lot of young people living in the digital age tend to forget that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this, you heard it here. Bill's Law of advocacy impact. Here's the law. The more time and effort it takes, the more effective the action is. So liking a tweet, which took 1/10 of 1/1,000,000th of a calorie to move the thumb and took 1/4,000,000th of a millisecond, guess what? Not very impactful. Getting on the train, going to Washington with a group of your friends and setting up a meeting and sitting down and saying, we came from New York because we want you to pass a bill on single-use plastics. And here's why we're passionate about it. We've done our research. This is why you should support this bill. That will make a difference. It doesn't take that many meetings like that to make a difference. Now, it is true that if 1 billion people like a particular tweet or something, it will get somebody's attention somewhere, but it's ephemeral. It's a flash in the pan. And so I think that you're on to something there, that the digital, it plays a part in the whole ecosystem, but it's not like where you're going to hit the grand slam. It's not, you know, and it's not actually, you know, it's again, it's like collectivism is not activism. And again, I'm not saying it's not good to do, and it's not a great way to gather ideas and organize other people and everything, but we have done research, interviewed congressional staff, and what they say, there's an organization called the Congressional Management Foundation that does an annual survey of members and staff about what actually works. It's constituents getting on the train and having a meeting. So, Bill's law, the more time and effort it takes, whatever it is, the more effective it is in the policy change.
Well, and also, I mean, into that too, I also, this is something that if you're like me and you live in New York City, where your representatives tend to already be on board with the bills that we want to advocate for on global aid, and on, you know, COVID relief, including global aid and all of that, it's remembering to pick up the phone and send the note that says thank you. Right? We can often focus so much on trying to lobby the people who we got to get on side to get a bill passed, that we can forget how important it is to call up your senator's office and say, thank you for fighting for this, and please keep fighting for this. Because the constituents who don't like what they're doing are calling up. And so it is with that you can find in the chat the link to how to advocate for the Green Climate Fund. And it's, you know, I'm saying that without having looked up the fact that I'm fairly certain that my two senators are in favor of supporting the Green Climate Fund. But it does matter too to every now and then pick up a phone and say to Senator Gillibrand, thank you for your support on this. One of the things, Bill mentioned this before about how everything's connected, and if we don't pay attention to climate change, we are not going to make a dent on hunger in long term. We're not going to make a dent on mental health and resilient communities. We're not going to make a dent on migration. In a number of, she's in 2015 now, so it's a while ago, 8 years ago, I went to northern Ghana with Catholic Relief Services. And what I saw there in July was a community of people who should have been on their second round of wheat, right? They should have been halfway through the 4 crops that in the growing season they grow, and they were only on the first. And so part of this is kind of like the coffee example, but they were having to change what they grow. And as a result, right, they're going to have to change their diet, and they're going to have to change what they eat. And food is tied up in culture. So when we talk about hunger and access to food, we're also talking about culture and history and what we would call food sovereignty, right? This sense of how my generations of my people have have been growing certain things and making certain recipes. And so it isn't just about having enough calories, right? It's also about all of these things that go into a community's identity. You know, and I stood outside looking at the sky with the Archbishop of Tamale, who was a lovely older man, as he pointed, and he's just like, I just want the clouds to come. But you see those clouds over there? That's not real clouds. That's just going to be a passing storm. As he's walking me through, right, the way that this impacts. And this is right. This is why the Green Climate Fund is about hunger. This is why the Green Climate Fund is about migration. This is why the Green Climate Fund is, and my science teacher sister would say, is about all of us continuing to exist at all. They're all connected. And so you can see in the chat, and when I post this on YouTube, I'll post that link as well, so that those who watch it after can also click and learn more about why it is that CRS is asking us to advocate for the Green Climate Fund. This is our last event of this academic year in terms of our online lectures and panels. I want to express my deepest gratitude to Bill, Sara, and Merin for being our conversation this evening and educating all of us. I want to thank everybody who logged in, and to everyone who will watch this on YouTube after. This is important work, and one of the most important things that I think we do at St. John's as part of what does it mean to be a St. John's graduate, what does it mean to be a St. John's student, is providing an education that empowers you to advocate for yourselves and for those who often are missing at the table, are missing in the conversation, advocate with others, not just on behalf of them. And so when I see students like you two, and that we've had throughout when we started doing these virtual series during COVID, I could not be prouder of the way our students advocate. And I'm very glad that Bill got to see a little bit of that tonight. So thank you, everyone, and everybody have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much for having me.